when many of his disciples heard it, they said, "Well, this teaching is difficult. Who can accept it?" But Jesus, being aware that his disciples were complaining about it, said to them, "Does this offend you? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It's the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is useless. The words that I've spoken to you are spirit and life. But among you there are some who do not believe." For Jesus knew from the first who were the ones who did not believe and who was the one who would betray him. And he said, "For this reason I have told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by the Father." Because of this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer went about with him. So Jesus asked the 12, "Do you also wish to go away?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of eternal life. We've come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God."
Well, Christine, this passage is the very end of a long chapter 6 of John's Gospel. And it's hard to remember that it all started really with the feeding of the 5,000, and then this conversation between Jesus and his disciples, or Jesus and the disciples in the broadest sense of what it means for Jesus to be the bread of life. And having read it, I wonder if you have any initial comments or questions.
Well, I have to wonder what it was like for the disciples.
For the disciples.
And they'd had this incredible experience, feeding 5,000, people following, people coming from everywhere. Jesus was the latest buzzword and they were the in group. And then suddenly it all changes. And you've got opposition and dissension and people walking away, and the tide goes out and suddenly they're left all exposed. It must have felt terribly. I can sort of imagine the disciples grumbling among themselves and sort of muttering, and what are we going to do, and refusing to look at each other. It must have been a terribly disconcerting time.
And clearly, whatever it was that Jesus was saying, well, what was it he was saying? Because you started by saying this teaching, people said this teaching is difficult, who can accept it? And of course he's claiming that my flesh is what you need to eat. It's a sort of cannibalistic type of thing.
Well, feeding the 5,000 is one thing, but feeding him with himself is quite another thing.
And of course that takes us into a whole 2,000 years of history on Eucharist. But I'm fascinated actually by the end of it, because of his teaching, many of the disciples turned back and they abandoned Jesus. And then suddenly we go from this wide-angle lens of all these disciples there, cut back to the 12, and we come in there. And Peter, it's always Peter, isn't it, who says, "Lord, what about us? What can we do? Where can we go?" And Jesus asks him, "Are you going to leave as well?"
And Jesus gives us and the disciples the opportunity to keep making a commitment. They've made a commitment, they're his disciples, but he still says, "Are you still with me?
Yes.
Are you going to stay or are you going to go?" And so they have that ability to make a new commitment, to say, yes, it's getting tough, the hype is over, there's the foreshadowing of the cross even, but yes, we're with you, Jesus. You have the words of eternal life.
And of course Judas is mentioned in this context as well, isn't he?
It's the
one who will make another choice, not the choice to stay with Jesus.
Yes.
I love the last verse, Peter. Where can we go? You have the words of eternal life. We've come to believe. We've come to believe. Doesn't seem to have been an instant thing. It's a process. We've come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God, which of course is what John is wanting us to do, those of us who read the Gospel.
It's a process, but I also get the feeling that it's a bit of an aha moment.
I'm sure.
It's Peter's being challenged, and suddenly it's, gosh,
that's what I'm saying.
Over all these years, this is what I suddenly realised, that I've come to believe, and I'm not going to leave you. Yeah. It's too important.
So going back to the feeding of the 5,000, which of course is one of the great signs in John's Gospel, this is really the culmination of it, isn't it? That's the aha moment. As we know in John, no miracles but signs.
Yes.
which help us to come to that point of saying, yes, you are the Christ, you are the one who has you are the Holy One of God. And I guess for us, we need each of us to come to that point, don't we?
And to make it daily.
And to make it daily.
Keep the commitment.
Good.